great pleasure to introduce Stephanie Davies-Arai. Now, Stephanie has quite a presence online. She runs the website Transgender which many of us are looking at all the time because of the extraordinary information on there. But she's also got other careers as an educator and a blogger and communications expert and so on. All of that is in the notes if you want to look at it. All I can say is it's absolutely terrific that she's here today to talk to us. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Do I sound all right? I'm not too close to the mic. Am I clear? Give me a thumbs up. Great. Thanks. Okay. So that's my website that I set up for parents just last year. And it was, I work with parents, and I think even if you said to parents 2 years ago, certainly 5 years ago, that we'd developed this theory that we would apply to children, which meant that in order to be their authentic selves, they would have to be sterilised and medicalised for life, that no parent would believe me. So I'm really interested in how this new, let's call it a hypothesis, because it doesn't quite know it word theory, has taken root. And of course, what I think we're doing with these kids is treating them as if they are in a cultural bubble and have some innate fixed quality that they take through life, which is impervious to any influence coming from outside. Because I have such a short time, I'm going to spend the first half of this talk on little kids and the second half on adolescents, because I think they're both very important stages, and particularly in terms of identity development. When I talk about little kids, I'll talk about little boys, and when I talk about adolescents, I'll talk about teenage girls. The reason being that Bernadette Wren, actually, from the Tavistock Gender Clinic, confirmed this for me when I saw her at the seminar she did at Cambridge, that little boys outnumber little girls, but teenage girls vastly outnumber teenage boys presenting to gender clinics, which makes absolute sense and shows what a social movement this is, or social influence this is. This is our baseline. These are the kids we're talking about. This research was done by asking parents about their own kids. It's from a few years ago. It's not a transgender survey. This was before we had gender questioning children. So it was just looking at the basic sort of numbers of children who were sort of atypical in their toy choices. So there's 1% of children who actually say they are the opposite sex. Before all this kicked off. There's probably more now. Around 3% of boys play with what are traditionally assumed to be girl toys, and around 5% of girls prefer to play predominantly with boy toys. I'm surprised that figure's so low, actually. So that's the baseline. Those are the kids we're talking about. And of course, those kids haven't just sort of, they're not in this little bubble, they have landed in a culture. And the culture that we've had since the 70s, which has been referenced, is a very visual culture. We are an image-saturated culture, as never before. So in our history, it's a very, very recent thing that images have been all around us, and particularly high-resolution, digitally enhanced images. The images that kids see every day, as well as parents, the images that influence us all unconsciously and condition us, and particularly children. So these are the sorts of images you'll see in a newsagent or a supermarket. So the wider culture itself represents women in a very sexualised, objectified way, not wearing many clothes, and it represents men as being active and doing things, usually wearing clothes and running the world and things like that. And then this is the very specific child culture that we've created only over the last decade has it become this extreme. This is a great project, the Pink and Blue project, by Korean artist Jeong Mi Yoon. And it shows, it's a great illustration of how we are absolutely specifically training our girls and our boys into their cultural roles from birth in a way that we've never done before. So, you know, toys, clothes, books, shoes even, everything forces boys into the blue box, girls into the pink box, and those boxes do not overlap. They're completely opposite boxes. So when a little boy today, this is why I think the number of children saying they're the opposite sex is probably increasing, is because if a little boy looks around him and he's a little boy who prefers wearing princess costumes and playing with Barbie dolls, the message he gets everywhere in his culture is that's for girls. He gets it from the toy shop, girls' toys, boys' toys. He gets it maybe from his parents, but he gets it on toy packaging, and he gets it on TV ads. Everywhere he looks, he sees the message, that's for girls. So his childish logic says to him, that must mean I'm a girl. And that has never, the strict roles have never been so explicitly spelled out to children right from the start. It interests me that we do regulate advertising for children, but we don't regulate the kind of indoctrination and brainwashing of the toy, clothes, books industry. Let's look at actually what happens. That we can see from that culture that how socialised our roles are. But this is just a little bit of basics about the development, child development. That in the first year of life, all babies prefer playing with dolls and soft toys. There's no split between the sexes in the first year of life. At around 2 to 3 years, children understand the concepts as they're taught them: girl, boy, man, lady. And it's interesting that the children from the families with more rigid, fixed gender role beliefs gain that understanding up to 6 months earlier than other children, which just shows how socialised the concepts are. Around 4 to 5 years, children literally think that girls are the people who wear hair slides. Because what children do, what children's job is to classify and categorise everything. That's what they're working on in those early years. And the most important thing to categorise correctly is, of course, yourself. So the question, am I a girl, am I a boy, is a very, very important one for children to ask, and they categorise themselves. And the first thing they do when they make a category is to make the model or the stereotype. And only after they've established that stereotype can they move on and sort of begin to accept variations of it. If they establish that first, and then what children do is police it very rigidly in each other and in themselves, just to establish who they are. This is a couple of quotes here from two childhood early education specialists. Susan A. Miller says, around 4 to 5 years, the most amazing part of magical thinking for young children is their belief that they can make life be anything they want it to be. Remember, this is the age that we are transing children. 5 to 6 years, learning to distinguish between fantasy and reality is a really important developmental step that children make. Can you imagine that we're teaching, and this is partly why I think looking at this age group is really important, because we literally are teaching children of this age group in schools now that boy and girl are not categories with stable properties. They are in fact fantasies, they are feelings in our heads, and they are not material-based realities. We're doing that through some very powerful transgender organisations like Gendered Intelligence. But you can see from this, 4 to 5 years, the age of magical thinking and the age where children think boy and girl are stereotypes of behaviour and appearance. We can see that transgender ideology is the ideology of a 4 to 5-year-old. Children mature. What we know of this group of children is that over 80% of them will come to terms with their naked sex by puberty or by the end of puberty and achieve, you know, emotional and psychological health. And we also know that this group of children, they are overwhelmingly more likely to be gay or lesbian as adults and not transsexual or transgender. Those are facts, we know that. We're from lots and lots of different studies, including studies that were only of the most extreme cases. What we don't know, we have no idea which children will persist and which will desist. There's no way of knowing. Some of the most extreme cases desist. We have absolutely no criteria to judge. We also don't know any theoretical model of understanding or any reliable diagnostic criteria for this thing called gender dysphoria. We don't really know what it is, and we don't know how to diagnose it. We have not made a medical or even philosophical model of this yet. What the transgender, this new breed of self-appointed gender specialists will tell you is that the sign of children who are truly transgender is that they are persistent, persistent and insistent. That's a child. You know, I mean, that covers everyone. Perhaps some children are more consistent, persistent and bloody insistent than others. And perhaps we should be looking for the gene for obstinacy. Or, you know, the gene for bloody-mindedness or the gene for rebellion. You know, this difference in these children might not have anything to do with gender at all. But of course we're not looking at that. That sort of 5% of girls and 3% of boys who play with atypical toys could be seen as evidence that there's no such thing as a male or female brain, couldn't it? But it seems that we're not choosing to do that. We're choosing, it seems, to accept this wholly new, untested hypothesis that comes from a political campaign. And we're now running around like headless chickens trying to find brain studies that will prove it's true. And this is what's happened over the last few years. The number of children being referred to the Tavistock Clinic in London, which is England's only clinic for children and adolescents. The Sandyford Clinic in Glasgow have the same rising numbers. So it's been 50% year-on-year increase in children being referred to clinics. The number of under-10s has increased fourfold, and then it's really, really taken off last year. So it increased 100%, and we were told this was unprecedented, no idea why. You could map that graph, I think, against positive media stories of courageous children daring to be their authentic selves and the brave parents who support them. I think this was probably the first programme I remember that I thought, oh, it's really mainstream now. It was Louis Theroux, Transgender Kids. So this was in April 2015. We go back right in the middle of that year. And the number actually of children I've heard saying, or teenagers saying, it was when I watched Transgender Kids, Louis Theroux, that made me realise, oh, that's me, I'm transgender. It was followed by Channel 4 series, All in the Wrong Body, which started with an episode of Transgender Kids. And of course we know, don't we, that hardly a week seems to go by without one of these happy stories in the media. And so how have this massive, really well-funded, incredibly well-organised campaign managed to get this? Well, they control the media. They've got two media groups, Press for Change, Transmedia Watch. Leveson never managed it. Women have never managed it. But Transgender Inc. has got the press and the media under its thumb. It's given us a very heartwarming story. A boy trapped in a girl's body, a girl trapped in a boy's body. Nothing about chemicals, sterilisation, surgery, hormones, nothing about that messy stuff. Just girl trapped in a boy's body. It's somehow taken root in the public consciousness. It's a sympathetic story. But I think the other big part of that story is this narrative that goes alongside. And you see both of them in the stories that you read in the press, you hear on the radio and on TV. The suicide narrative. It's from a 16-year-old girl on a program, on a Radio 4 program Beyond Binary. I would probably kill myself if I couldn't transition. From a parent, and this is a classic parent statement, they kill themselves, you know. And I want a happy daughter and not a dead son. Guardian last week, in the article already mentioned, headline for its bit about sex reassignment surgery, it's life-saving work. So we have this narrative is as firmly implanted as the girl in the boy's body narrative is. They go hand in hand. This has absolutely no evidence to back it, this claim. It's used by groups like Mermaids, and I think the three most powerful groups in the UK are Mermaids, the Transgender Support Group, GIAS, the Gender Identity Research and Education Society, and Gendered Intelligence, who go into schools, who work with the police and all sorts of organisations, and the government. So they put forward this suggestion continually that if you don't allow your child to transition, or if you delay treatment, the child will likely commit suicide, because the suicide stats are so high, 41%, which every time you read it goes up. It's based on a study which was analysed by the Williams Institute and found to be flawed, and had that study been conducted correctly, then those figures would probably be halved. The one that was presented at the UK Government Transgender Inquiry was based on the PACE survey, which had a similar figure. But as with both these studies, they are based on older people. So the PACE study, for example, was people under the age of 26. So the only information there is how suicidal are this group of people aged under 26. We cannot know from these studies whether sex reassignment surgery prevents suicide or causes it. We have no idea. So there's no evidence for that story at all, but it's the one I think that particularly, of course, convinces parents that they must act, because not only, you know, it's the cruelest bullying threat you could possibly give to a parent. If you don't do this, your child will commit suicide. It's a bullying tactic that we know, and it goes against Samaritan's guidelines for never attaching one reason for suicide. So why they're allowed to do that, we don't know. So this sort of moves us on actually into the years of adolescence. And those figures from the last graph that shot up to 100% this year, what's phenomenal about this is the ratio between boys and girls. So in this study, there are studies from Canada, Holland and the Tavistock Clinic London between 1989 and 2010. It was predominantly a boy thing. So boys are in blue here. As we know, I mean, in the late 60s, it was over 90% of adult transsexuals were male. You could almost say it's sort of something in the male brain, wouldn't you, that makes men. So boys have always outnumbered girls. But from around 2006 onwards, we've got again Canada, Holland, the Tavistock Clinic. Girls begin to move ahead of boys. That gap between girls and boys has increased year on year. The figure at the end is Finland, and that was a study from last year, and that girls are sort of shooting off the graph. So when it comes to adolescents who think they are transgender, we see that it's predominantly teenage girls. And that's what's causing the imbalance between boys and girls now. That teenage girls between the age of 12 and 14 are disproportionately referring themselves to gender clinics. And why is that? And nobody's really asking why it is. Anything that I've read from gender specialists, including Tavistock, says, oh, it's because it's more well known now, it's more accepted, and even girls have more confidence to do it. Which is great, isn't it? What they found in the Finland study, which is a huge cause of concern, but not surprising to us, I'm sure, is that the number of serious comorbidities in the teenage girls presenting to gender clinics. And these girls usually have, you know, 2 of these out of this list, not just one. It is also what's being found at the Tavistock Clinic, and again Bernadette Wren referred to this in her Cambridge seminar, that they're finding that the proportion of troubled girls is really increasing. It didn't used to be to that extent. It's noted a significant increase. So we have anxiety, depressive disorders, psychological problems, autistic spectrum. Kids are vastly overrepresented at gender clinics. Kids who are bullied or isolated, self-harming, cutting, eating disorders, troubled background, past trauma or sexual abuse. And you can see there's a whole host of interesting areas to look at. What's happening with these girls is that increasingly the underlying factors are not being looked at in preference of a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and being a boy. It's the only area of therapy really that we accept the presenting problem. In any other area, a therapist or a counsellor would say, well, there's the presenting problem, what's behind it? You know, they'd ask the question why, they'd try to find out what the deeper underlying problem was. The problem is when you have a diagnosis which is a social justice diagnosis and a protected category diagnosis, that you don't look at the background underlying factors. It could be that it's these underlying factors that are causing those high suicide feelings in these young children. We don't know because we're not looking. What's interesting about these disorders is if you look at, this was from the APA, the American Psychological Association Task Force on the Sexualisation of Girls. This report was back in 2007, and you can see how similar the disorders are. Lack of confidence in and comfort with own body, ring any bells, shame, anxiety, self-disgust, low self-esteem, negative mood, depression, eating disorders. Very, very similar list of symptoms there. I think we had that report from the APA Task Force, we have never ever taken this seriously. We have never got together and thought, how can we help these teenage girls who take a look at their sexualised culture and say, no thanks, and suffer these psychological problems because of this culture they're going into and the role that they're expected to play within it, which they are very highly trained in wherever they look. Of course, the culture, the sexualised culture, has got much worse since 2007. We're now a full-blown porn culture, and that in itself suggests a good reason that we almost have a pool of clients waiting for this new theory to come along and say, actually, you're a boy. And that solves everything, doesn't it? I've always been a boy, I'm a boy in my head, and what a lovely solution that is. This is a really chilling statement from Giles, just to put this in, and to look at the path and the medicalisation of non-conformity. In collaboration with Mermaids, Giles has been campaigning since 2000 for the NHS to make medication available to gender non-conforming young people. We actually won't have any non-conforming people left. Even now, we won't. Even now, all of the non-conforming young people fall under the trans umbrella. They are somehow collectively trans. So this is the medication that they're talking about. You can see here how each stage of this creates the need for the next stage. So social transition is effectively conditioning children that they actually are the opposite sex. It actually, it changes the brain on a micro level. If you think of a child of 5 or 6 who's being told by a trusted adult in his life every day, you're a girl, and the teachers, and living as a girl for 2 or 3 years creates the need for puberty blockers. Because for that child, when puberty comes, it's going to change that child's thinking. That puberty is going to change you into the opposite sex. So puberty blockers have been shown, short-term studies have shown that the psychological effects are good. Of course, you have created a fear and then you've provided the medical solution to it. And there they are. Puberty blockers are meant to be fully reversible. We don't know. Puberty is a time when there's when a flood of sex hormones triggers the amazing and really important changes in the brain, the teenage brain, which doesn't finish its job till around age 25. We have no idea what blocking those sex hormones does to the maturation of the teenage brain. We have no idea of the effects of puberty blockers because we have not done the research. The research is not there. We've never done this to children before. I want to make that really emphasise that. We have never done this to children before. Healthy children. Going back. So once you get onto puberty blockers, of course, you're happy because that's stopped you becoming the opposite sex as you think now. But, of course, that happiness soon wears off because your mates, and this is the crucial time of identity development for teenagers, is identification with the group. And once you have established identification with the group, then you begin to diversify and find out who you are within the group. But the identification with the group is crucial. Can you imagine a 12, 13-year-old whose peer group is sexually developing and moving on, and if you remember when you develop sexually how boring those kids are that are coming up behind you, you've got no interest in them anymore. That's where we're leaving these kids, which of course creates the need for cross-sex hormones as soon as possible. And as somebody mentioned, a private doctor was giving cross-sex hormones at age 12 last week, and that is, it's inevitable that will happen, and it's what the transgender organisations want. In fact, they want children to go on straight onto cross-sex hormones without missing out the puberty blockers. This treatment, we'll just rush through, chest binding. This is awful for girls. It particularly affects girls. The dangers of chest binding, broken ribs, damaged breast tissue, inflamed ribs, blood clots, even heart attack. Double mastectomy. This is, boys might not even get any surgery, but girls, this is a step. Chest binding and then breast surgery, and I would imagine especially girls with large breasts to hide the fact that they're female. Testosterone on the girl's body. If you imagine the biggest danger of testosterone is blood clotting, thickened blood. That's pushing its way around a smaller female cardiovascular system, thinner arteries and smaller veins. We have no idea if this is off-label. Testosterone is only approved for use on adult male bodies. We have no idea of the long-term effects on our girls of testosterone. But there's a happy trans boy apparently getting his medication from the lovely doctor. This I just want to finish with just to really make it clear what the world we're leading our children into. This is gendered intelligence. Has been going into schools, primary schools, since 2008. They cover around 20 primary schools a year. And under the guise of teaching gender diversity, they're teaching little school kids that the distinction between boys and girls is not biological sex, but it's a feeling in your head, and that biology doesn't matter. This is a booklet for adolescents, and I'd just like to read out a quote from this booklet just to really, really clarify what we're allowing these groups to teach our children. How you look, how you speak, and how you have sex are all aspects of you, but your identity is paramount. A woman is still a woman, even if she enjoys getting blowjobs. A man is still a man, even if he likes getting penetrated vaginally. How you have sex need not affect your identity. In whose world?
Okay, folks, we have 10 minutes or so for questions. In response to what Stephanie has been telling us, and I expect there are quite a few, so who would like to start? Yes.
I'll just be loud, shall I? I didn't come out as a lesbian until I was 24, and I'd say the main reason for that is because being very regularly sexually abused as a kid until fairly shortly before that. And one of my big concerns is that when we're starting to encourage kids to transition at a very young age, there's no way that they've been able to start to develop or even consider a lesbian identity for themselves, and of course can never realise that they're actually lesbians, and this gender non-conforming is just about that. So I didn't want them to come out until I was 24, so I had no chance, and I think I probably would have been encouraged to transition when I was younger. Another thing I think in terms of the surprise abuse, of which I think loads of women are, we've certainly all been living in fear of it, it hasn't happened to us. I think potentially being offered to transition to male would have been attractive as a way of trying to end the abuse, because I wouldn't imagine we wanted to then continued, and I think so many girls are being abused, this could be part of the picture as well.
Just as the transing of prepubertal children is a form of gay conversion therapy, because those children are overwhelmingly more likely to be gay or lesbian, not transgender or transsexual. But the same with what we're seeing with teenage girls is actually it's very common to announce to parents around age 12, I'm a lesbian. Parents accept it. That's lovely, darling. And then 6 months later, they've been on Tumblr and found out that they're not lesbians, they're trans men. We don't know who these people are on these Tumblr forums who are telling these girls that they kind of know, actually, I'm a straight guy. I'm not a lesbian. But same-sex attraction doesn't tend to develop until the late teens, early 20s, even mid-20s. Same-sex attraction tends to develop later. It's an exploration. And so you are transing girls before they can find a lesbian identity and actually engage in a lesbian relationship with their own fully intact female bodies. So we're denying girls that experience, and that's often the time that girls realise, no, I'm not a trans guy, I'm a lesbian, because I've had this wonderful bodily experience with another woman. Yeah.
I'm just really glad that you mentioned Tumblr actually, because I'm doing my PhD Tumblr, because I'm doing my PhD thesis in the role of social media in the neoliberalisation of feminism and the creation of the Tumblr Feminists, which I thought was really interesting. But as I was born in 1993, so I was born and I grew up on social media and on social networking. Now, I didn't come out until 2 years ago as a lesbian, but when I grew up online, what I used to do is I used to go on dating websites and pretend to be a boy, because in my head, the only possible way that I could form a relationship with a woman would be if I was a boy, because I didn't know that women could be with other women. And do you think that social media and things like Tumblr and the advertising of that would be telling other women that that's also true, and that therefore must mean they must transition into a boy? Do you think that is something that the social media has done?
I certainly think that social media is, like lesbian is the lowest of the low, and it's become worse, I think. That lesbian is still the biggest insult that you give to a girl. It stands for ugly, fat and hairy, still. But it's got worse, I think, because lesbian's really not cool, and you know, trans is very cool and edgy. So I think there's a lot of things going on there, but I certainly think it's it's conversion by whoever's doing it. Whether it's partly internalised lesbophobia, because of course you take in those messages from society, and it's more comfortable for everybody if you're a straight guy than if you're a lesbian. It takes a lot less work, or seemingly it does.
A woman in the middle there, yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I just wondered if you had any theories about why there might be more very young boys than young girls.
Yeah, because it's less acceptable for young boys to play with girl toys because it makes them lower status. Girls are inferior. And that's always been the case, and it's why we have tomboys who are not really a version of a boy, they're girls. I mean, but that's accepted as long as they toe the line of puberty, because, you know, we will indulge it with the girls, you know, they'll learn soon enough. But with the boys, no, we can't possibly have you. And parents get so upset. The stories that you read of parents who transition their boys, they have a family crisis when the 3-year-old boy comes down the stairs in a princess costume when there's guests. And it's like, Dad is shouting, child's in tears, mother's in tears, the event is cancelled, the family are in crisis. You know, it's so obvious that more boys will be trans than girls for that reason, and it shows that it's not that there's more boys who are innately girls. It's that it's not acceptable for boys to play with, to lower themselves.
Hi, this is sort of unrelated topic, but as a teenage girl, I had to be treated by an endocrinologist with sex hormones to properly have puberty, and I can say it's been something that's taken me almost 30 years to process the effect of what it meant to have a man telling me every few months, you're not female enough, or this is what you are, and some of the things that were inappropriate in my treatment. So all I can say is, yes, it's important. I think I just thank you for actually saying that it does have an effect on the children, how profoundly, how they view themselves as people even, and as they see themselves as women as well. So it's been something which I can see that there will be long-term psychological effects on these children, that they've been told, like, you are a problem, you've got to be treated, and we've got the solution to you. And it is very interesting, it is a male-run kind of thing that's selling them.
We'd rather say to a child, your body is wrong, than society is wrong, and let's try and ignore society. But you're right, every drug, every treatment has its side effects. I mean, one of the side effects of puberty blockers is depression. And they all have their side effects, and no drug is completely reversible. It's just a nonsense.
I guess I'm just wondering, I've been wanting to form a counter-lobby to gyres and mermaids for about 5 years, and I don't know how. I don't know the answer to this question, but how do we, we don't have the pharma corporate backing, we don't have, the drugs company is the 3rd biggest industry on the planet. We don't have that kind of backing, but we could be more organised. We could be going into schools with this message, and I don't know what the answer is, but we need to form a lobby to counter that lobby, because what you've shown us today is even worse than what I thought they were doing, and it's more militant than what they were doing 3 years ago. So, what I'd love to get out of this day, I don't know how, is to start thinking about how to form a counter lobby to the drugs and trans lobby.
And I think parents have a massive role in this, and parents do have political power. An organisation like Mumsnet would be great, except they just banned somebody from the site for misgendering. So it seems to be that they were the only site where parents could, or women could discuss this openly. We'll see. But yes, I mean, parents speaking at their child's schools. I'm seeing women now going to schools and asking them what their policy is on trans kids, because every school is actually different. There's no legislation that goes across schools, every school can supposedly choose, but really they're in a bind because this is a protected category, transgender, and it applies to all kids. And because, you know, gender non-conforming falls under the transgender protected category, that, you know, it's very hard, you know, it's almost impossible for schools to not collude in the transition of a pre-pubertal child, even though the Dutch Endocrine Society advised against the transition of little kids for obvious reasons, and the NHS supposedly goes with the Dutch advice.
Okay, but we have got an awful lot of people wanting to ask. Yes, there is somebody down here who's had her hand up quite a long time, actually. Yeah.
There's someone with the microphone.
Okay, there's someone over there who's had their hand up a long time. Okay, well, let's take those two and they're the last. Okay.
Hi. I just wanted to mention about the sort of similar phenomenon in Thailand, which has obviously had a long history. I've just lived there in Laos for 6 months, where there's like a long history of transgender, or they don't consider themselves transgender, but as we would see it. And it became clear to me when I was living there that it was a very similar thing in terms of it was a way for gay children to be accepted in society, and that from a young age, any pretty little boys who seem effeminate are called katoi, which is the word for ladyboy, and that there's very little distinction between katoi and gay effeminate men. And that there's that huge social pressure upon them, and I felt that as a society that is far more gender constricted in terms of roles between men and women there, it was like a really clear that's what had happened, that it had been a way to allow gay men to be accepted within society by saying that they were women, and obviously there's a big history of surgery there as well.
You see it in very sort of conservative, very rigid, gender-divided societies. So in Iran, for example, there's, you know, the homosexuality is banned, but they will provide free sex change surgery to sort of make you into a supposedly heterosexual. Yeah, it's a very conservative, reactionary theory. Transgenderism. It's a very backwards theory. It takes us right back. Yeah, it's not progressive.
Okay. So my sister very kindly gave me the word because he wanted to say the same thing. So basically, I'm coming from a point that I know a small child, around 10 years old, who has been bullied in school because she wanted to wear trousers instead of a skirt and wanted to have a hair that goes until her shoulder rather than longer. First being labeled as lesbian and then very shortly within the period of half a year as a boy, and why she's a boy instead of a girl. And I was just wondering how actually these kind of organizations that go into school and kind of talk to kids about their sexuality and how they are either boys or girls, they are very much intertwined with the kind of economy of sexualizing children, and how, you know, they are given the option of choosing in what gender they want to be sexualized. They are not given the choice not to be sexualized, so they are very early on exposed to these ideas of what is a lesbian, what is transgender, which they shouldn't really worry about up until a certain point. They don't have to identify themselves as sexual beings yet at the age of 9 or 8 or whatever.
The problem is that you don't get those PHSE lessons in, you know, what's homosexual, what's it, until you're older. Groups like Gendered Intelligence are going into schools and teaching 4- and 5-year-olds about transgender because that's allowed. You know, one of the things that they've done very cleverly that has allowed us to think this is okay to do to children is the change of language, because not many parents would be happy to say, here's my little boy, he's a transsexual. You know, you wouldn't get parents saying that about their 5-year-olds, but your transgender, that's sort of sanitized. It's not about sex, it's about gender. So that, you know, but it means that they can get in first. They can, the transgender organisations can get into kids younger, say you're transgender before these kids even know about homosexuality, heterosexuality, anything. So that's why it's very disingenuous when they say, oh, you can't make a trans child. Well, no, you couldn't make a really butch, macho boy into a girl. No, you couldn't, but you can certainly make a gay man into a girl if you tell him he's a girl at that, at a young enough age.
Thank you. I know that lots of you have things to say, and it's a hugely important issue, and I think we could go on and on, but I think we are going to have to stop because we need to go to lunch. So, sorry about that, folks, but it's a fascinating discussion, a hugely important issue, and thanks very much, Stephanie.